In the autumn of 732 AD, two great forces stood on the brink of a battle that would decide the fate of Europe. On one side, the mighty Umayyad Caliphate, whose armies had swept across North Africa, crushed the Visigoths, and established their rule over Spain. On the other, the Franks, led by the formidable Charles Martel, a man who had fought his way to power and was now the last line of defense for Christian Europe. The Umayyads had built an empire stretching from the deserts of Arabia to the shores of the Atlantic. With each conquest, their influence expanded, and now they had their sights set on the wealth of Francia. After seizing Septimania in 719, they had turned their gaze to Aquitaine, a land ruled by Duke Odo, who had already faced their fury. A decade earlier, Odo had won a stunning victory at Toulouse, halting the Muslim advance temporarily. But the threat never faded. When Abd al-Rahman Al-Ghafiqi took command of Al-Andalus, he was determined to finish what his predecessors had started. He raised a formidable army, numbering between 15,000 and 20,000 men, battle-hardened cavalry, the best warriors the Caliphate could muster. Meanwhile, Francia was recovering from years of internal conflict. Charles Martel, the power behind the Merovingian throne, had spent years crushing rebellions and consolidating his rule. His rise had not been easy, but his relentless drive had turned the Franks into a disciplined and battle-ready force. As Al-Rahman prepared his invasion, he saw an opportunity to weaken Aquitaine further. A rebellious governor named Munuza, seeking independence, had allied himself with Duke Odo through a political marriage. But Al-Rahman crushed this resistance, executing Munuza and solidifying Umayyad control over the region. With no one left to challenge him in the south, Al-Rahman marched north. His forces stormed Bordeaux, overwhelming Odo's troops and plundering the city. Realizing he could not stop the onslaught alone, Odo made a desperate decision. He rode north to seek the aid of Charles Martel. For years, Odo and Charles had been rivals, but now they had a common enemy. Charles agreed to help, but on his terms. Odo was forced to submit to Frankish authority, and in return, Charles gathered his army. Unlike the Umayyads, who relied on swift and powerful cavalry, Charles's strength lay in his disciplined heavy infantry, hardened warriors trained to stand their ground. As the Umayyads moved deeper into Frankish territory, they turned toward Poitiers and Tours, drawn by the immense wealth of the Abbey of St. Martin. But Charles had already positioned his forces on high ground, forcing the Umayyads to fight on his terms. For 6 days, the armies faced each other in a tense standoff. The Franks, forming an unbreakable shield wall, stood firm as the Umayyad cavalry charged again and again. Unlike previous battles, where the sheer force of cavalry had shattered enemy lines, the Franks did not break. Their tight formations absorbed the blows, their discipline holding firm against the relentless assaults. Then, as the battle raged, Odo led a surprise attack on the Umayyad camp. Chaos erupted as soldiers rushed back to defend their plunder, believing their spoils were in danger. Amid the confusion, Al-Rahman himself was struck down, leaving his army leaderless. With their general dead and morale shattered, the Umayyads withdrew under the cover of darkness. When dawn broke, the Frankish army found the battlefield empty. The invaders had fled, abandoning their dreams of conquest. The Battle of Tours was more than just a military victory. It was a turning point in history. The Umayyads would never again make a serious push into Frankish lands. Charles Martel's triumph earned him the title, the Hammer, and his legacy would pave the way for the rise of the Carolingian Empire. The echoes of the Battle of Tours did not fade with the retreat of the Umayyad forces. Its impact reverberated across Europe and the Islamic world, shaping the course of history for centuries to come. Charles Martel had not only secured victory on the battlefield, he had laid the foundations for a new era. The Franks, once divided by internal strife, now stood united under his leadership. And yet, the threat had not been fully extinguished. The surviving Umayyad forces regrouped south of the Pyrenees, licking their wounds but not entirely broken. Al-Andalus remained a powerful Islamic stronghold in the west, and its rulers would continue to test the strength of Christian Europe in the years to come. However, the decisive defeat at Tours shattered their dreams of unchecked expansion. No longer did the Muslim forces view Francia as easy prey. Instead, they turned inward, focusing on solidifying their rule in Spain and fortifying their hold on Septimania. For Charles Martel, the battle was just the beginning. His army had proven its mettle, but he knew that the Umayyads might return with greater force. He wasted no time in strengthening his realm. He expanded his military reforms, introducing a system that would define medieval European warfare for centuries: the mounted knight. Seeing the effectiveness of cavalry in battle, he began rewarding his most loyal warriors with land in return for military service. This system would later evolve into feudalism, a structure that would dominate European politics for nearly a millennium. The victory at Tours also cemented Charles's authority over the Frankish kingdom. Before the battle, his power had been challenged by nobles who saw him as merely the mayor of the palace, a king in all but name, yet still a servant of the weak Merovingian rulers. But after his triumph, there was no question as to who held real power. The people hailed him as the defender of Christendom, and his influence grew beyond Francia's borders. Pope Gregory III, recognizing Charles as the protector of the faith, sought his aid against the Lombards, who were threatening the Papal States in Italy. Though Charles did not live long enough to intervene directly, his successors would build upon the relationship between the Frankish kingdom and the papacy. This alliance would eventually culminate in the crowning of Charles's grandson, Charlemagne, as the Holy Roman Emperor, a moment that would shape European history for the next 1,000 years. But not all were pleased with Charles's growing power. The remnants of the Merovingian dynasty saw him as a usurper, and some Frankish nobles resented his centralization of power. Yet, Charles ruled with an iron grip. He crushed revolts, expanded his influence into Bavaria and Alemannia, and ensured that his family would remain at the helm of Frankish politics. When he died in 741, he left behind an empire that was stronger than ever, passing his legacy to his sons, Carloman and Pepin the Short. Pepin, following in his father's footsteps, would eventually depose the last Merovingian king and establish the Carolingian dynasty. And from this lineage, the greatest of all medieval rulers would emerge: Charlemagne, the man who would unite Western Europe under one rule and bring forth the Carolingian Renaissance. Yet, the struggle between Christendom and Islam did not end with the Battle of Tours. The Umayyads, though stopped in France, would continue to thrive in Spain. Their rule in Al-Andalus would lead to an era of immense cultural and scientific advancements, transforming cities like Córdoba into centers of learning and innovation. Over time, the Christians of northern Spain would begin their own counteroffensive. Inspired by victories like Tours, they embarked on what would become the Reconquista, a centuries-long struggle to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula. The shadow of Charles Martel's victory loomed large over this campaign, serving as a reminder that the tide could be turned. In the east, the Umayyad Caliphate itself would soon face its own reckoning. Weakened by internal strife, it would be overthrown in 750 by the Abbasids, a new dynasty that would shift the center of Islamic power to Baghdad. The collapse of the Umayyads in the east marked the end of their expansionist era, but their legacy endured in Spain, where a surviving prince, Abd al-Rahman I, would establish a new Umayyad emirate in Córdoba. As the centuries passed, the battle between Islam and Christendom continued to define European history. From the Crusades to the fall of Constantinople, the struggle for dominance between these two civilizations would shape the destiny of the world. And yet, it was on that fateful day in 732, on the fields near Tours, that the first great turning point had been reached. Had the Franks failed, had Charles Martel faltered, history might have taken a vastly different path. Europe, fragmented and vulnerable, could have succumbed to further invasions. The dominance of Islam might have extended beyond Spain, reshaping the cultural and religious identity of the continent. But instead, the Franks held the line. Christendom survived, and the foundations of medieval Europe were laid. The Battle of Tours was not just a clash of armies, it was a battle for the soul of a continent. And though the war between these two civilizations would rage for centuries to come, the hammer of Charles Martel had struck a decisive blow, forging the future of Europe itself.